right, hello everyone. We are here today for the Startups in Real Estate panel, and I'm here with Christian Adams and Shawn O'Dowd, who both actually have startups in the space themselves. Shawn, do you want to start by just giving us a little background about yourself and how you got into the industry?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to chat about that. So I'm Shawn. I'm CEO of Concierge. We provide outsourced transaction coordination services to real estate agents, 24/7 support, flat monthly fee. Industry though, it's kind of interesting. I'm in Chicago now, bounced around growing up. My mom was an agent. So I used to, when I was young, bake cookies for other agents in her brokerage that they could bring to the open house and try to get the house to smell like cookies and get buyers. So that was my first business in the real estate space. Fast forward a while, ended up going to business school and working in consulting for a while. But always knew I'd get back to the real estate space and kept on hearing about transaction coordination as just the key pain point for agents, which one thing kind of led to another. And here we are with Concierge today.
Okay, awesome. And Christian, you?
Yeah, pretty similar path. So Christian Adams, CEO and co-founder of Appraiser. We basically take home inspection reports and turn them into repair estimates so that buyers and agents kind of negotiate effectively during the transaction space. Yeah, I did not have family or parents in the business, but from the age of about 22, I knew I wanted to kind of be an independent business person. So I actually got licensed as an agent in Texas, initially in Dallas. And from there, just being an independent realtor, eventually ended up running a brokerage, about 100 plus agents, spanning the state of Texas, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, primarily focusing on the buyer, property management and investment space. And as an agent and a broker working in the business, that's exactly where Appraiser came from. We had this headache coming up again and again. Every time a client saw an inspection report, the first question out of their mouth was, well, what's it going to cost to fix everything? And we couldn't answer that. There was no easy way to do it. We went out looking for a solution. One didn't exist. And so we created it. And that's kind of fast forward to today. But yeah, I never actually left the space. I've been in real estate almost 20 years at this point, and just kind of moving from that I call myself a recovering real estate broker, moving from that side to the prop tech side now. Okay,
awesome. And can you dig in a little bit more, give us some more details about your company and how it operates?
Yeah, so essentially, we built this tool internally, Appraiser, before we kind of created it as a brand. You know, when you buy a home, you receive a home inspection report. Typically, they're about 40 to 80 pages long. They're incredibly complicated, and they tell you everything you need to know about what's wrong with the home, apart from that one thing, which is what it's going to cost you to fix everything. So we actually initially built an internal tool that would take those reports very manually and turn them into repair estimates in local markets. But it became so popular that agents from outside our brokerages were starting to ask for the same functionality. And we started charging basically to do it, then created a brand around it. And now what we have is very sophisticated artificial intelligence that lets you take any home inspection report written on any software platform in any format by any home inspector anywhere in the US. You can simply upload it to our platform. And in 24 hours or less, that's going to get turned into a really, really accurate estimate of repairs that the buyer and the agent can use. They can also interact with it as well. Often on a home inspection report, you're going to see a lot of what our production team calls stocking filler. It's just information that's not, there's nothing really wrong. It might be a piece of torn carpet or a cracked tile or something like that. So what we do is we break everything out, make it very clear and easy to digest for the agent and the buyer so they can kind of go forward and make an educated decision. We let them pare down the information and kind of represent it. And those 80-page reports typically end up about 1 or 2 pages in our format. Just makes it really easy for people to go back to the seller and for the agents to talk and say, look, at the end of the day, this is a price negotiation. That's what a real estate contract is, right? So they can get down to the dollars and cents and the brass tacks and basically come to an agreement and move forward with the transaction. Especially today when things are just moving incredibly fast.
Gotcha. Okay, so is the buyer your customer?
That's a really good question. We've got 3 customers really. So we have the buyer, I mean, they're the one ultimately making the decision, but their agent is 100% their guide throughout this process. They're the ones they turn to. We also have a lot of home inspectors are our clients as well, though, because home inspectors tend to have a really close relationship with the agents in their market, right? The agent wants to know they've got a good, reliable, solid professional inspector they can turn to help their clients out to make these decisions. So we operate really on many levels. So we have that buyer they just really want this information. Some of them come to us directly. We have large brokerage partnerships where they just understand that this is a big problem for their agents that need solving. Shawn probably knows from being in the real estate space too, the liability standpoint. Without a tool like Repair Pricer, what unfortunately happens is the agent is left often to guess what everything's going to cost to fix, and that doesn't really help anybody. And then obviously those inspectors too, that they often add our tool and their functionality to their inspection reports just to create a closer relationship with the agent and say, look, I understand you've got this problem, you've got this headache, let me fix that for you. And we actually have a lot of integrations in the home inspection space. So we can get access to the information we need to process our reports incredibly quickly. And typically there's a big disconnect between the home inspection space and the real estate prop tech space. There's not many companies that act as a bridge. And that's what we kind of tend to do. We actually take these reports and we turn them into highly accurate structured data. So we can actually say, for instance, like a platform like Shawn's, we could pass through really accurate data immediately via an API to pre-populate contracts and things like that. And there's not really much out there that kind of ties those two spaces together at the moment.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. All right, Shawn, do you want to tell us about yours now?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to chat through. I mean, right off the bat, that sounds like a fantastic platform you've got over there. On our side of things, the transaction coordination space is very interesting. If you think about it from an agent's perspective, once an agent gets a contract signed, we're talking Texas, we'll say fully executed here. Once we've got a contract fully executed to the day it actually closes, roughly typically 30 days later in today's market, an agent has about 15 to 20 hours worth of admin back-end work that they need to do. We're talking about coordinating with all parties involved. At a minimum, we're talking a title company, a lawyer, depending on the state. Typically, there's going to be a lender, there's the buyer, there's the seller, there's the other agent involved. And if you want to start getting exotic, you can throw in a 1031 exchange, you can throw in a property manager, there's a bunch of different additional parties. So essentially orchestrating this symphony of all of these people, making sure all the documents are where they need to be on the day they need to be there, and then logging all of that accurately and for compliance, to your point on compliance, is extremely, extremely time intensive. That estimate, 15 to 20 hours, is fairly accurate of how long it takes an agent to do that per every executed contract they have. Now, if you think about the average agent is closing about 11 transactions per year, 15 hours a month spent on every single contract, not terrible. However, once you start getting to the point you're closing 2, 3, 4 contracts per month, that 15 hours really adds up. Again, let's say we're talking about an agent who's closing 3 transactions per month. That's a pretty high producing agent, but 3 contracts per month at that 15 hours mark, we're talking 45 hours per month. That's essentially 1 week every month spent on admin, non-revenue generating admin. So if you're an agent, you can say, hey, I can outsource this to a transaction coordinator. Some firms have them in-house. Some people use outside freelancers. Some people use companies like ours. And I get that 45 hours back for that agent doing 3 transactions at 15 hours per transaction. I get essentially a week back every single month. And once you start doing the math, it becomes very, very clear. A TC, a transaction coordinator who's handling that work for them, gives them substantially more time out in the field, listing appointments, showing open houses, and essentially leads to higher revenue for these agents. We've got a calculator on our website where agents can kind of input these parameters and see what they get back from the time, and it's always, always mind-blowing to them. So that's the principle of transaction coordination. Transaction coordinators are growing incredibly fast across really the entire country. There's a couple states in particular where there's strong growth there. But there's kind of a couple knocks on the TC industry. Not a lot of agents have a great impression of the TC industry as a whole, and it typically kind of boils down to one of two reasons. Number one, the quality of TCs is perceived to be extremely low. The reason why is there's a lot of people who enter the TC industry with aspirations of becoming an agent themselves. So if someone enters the TC industry, they're pretty good at it, but they start seeing these closing statements and they see what the agents are making, which candidly is somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 times what the TC makes. And they're like, I'm gone. I'm going to go get my license. I'm going to go be an agent. I'm going to try my hand at it. So as a result, the knock is the good TCs are always leaving the industry almost immediately, and finding somebody who's good at being a TC and wants to stay in the industry is extremely hard. Knock number 2 on the TC industry is TCs work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. That's it. A lot of TCs have autoresponders on their emails. If you email them at 5:01, it's going to say, sorry, I'm gone for the day. Best of luck. That does not work in the real estate industry. Agents are working outside of 9 to 5. If you've got a file supposed to close tomorrow morning, there's a problem and your TC is not answering, that's a significant issue. So if you kind of take all of those factors into play, Close Concierge is essentially the solution and the alternative option to that. We provide that outsourced transaction coordination service to agents so they can get that time back, but we're very unique from everyone else who's doing that, in that we have extremely high standards on who we hire from a TC perspective. Our TCs make about double the market rate. And for that reason, we actually have a wait list of people waiting to apply for our next position. And it gives us essentially the highest quality TCs on the market. Number 2, we work outside the standard 9 to 5 hours. That's why we take care of our people and pay our people well, so they're willing to do that. But it also means agents are super excited to work with us because we've been on the phone with clients at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the evening, because there's a transaction closing 8 a.m. the next day, and it's a problem that needs to be solved. So I'll pause there. I know that's a lot, but that's essentially the TC industry as a whole, and then Close Concierge's role in it.
Okay, awesome. So are you basically a platform that helps onboard TCs and provide them?
So all of our TCs are in-house. The best way to think about us is we're a tech-enabled service. So the agents, clients, everybody involved in the transaction will be interacting with one of our TCs who's shepherding the deal from execution to close. However, we have a lot of tech on our side that allows us to do this in an effective manner, a compliant manner, and in a way that makes sure no balls are dropped throughout the entire transaction process.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're selling directly to the realtors?
That's correct. Our clients are agents.
Okay. Are you typically selling directly to the realtors themselves, or is it the brokerage? Or
It's a great question. What we've typically found is that the individual agents are the ones who are most excited about signing up with us. We have worked with brokerages in the past, and we do today. But we've typically found that agents alone, typically high performing agents, are the ones who are most excited by us. Our pricing model is unique compared to most TCs, and we make the most sense for a high producer rather than somebody who's just kind of getting their feet wet in the market.
Okay, and what's your pricing model again?
Yeah, so every TC company and TC that we are aware of charges on a per transaction basis, typically somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 to $450 per transaction. If it's a dual agency, that can get upwards of $700, $800. We don't do that. We are a monthly flat fee for unlimited transactions, $1,000 a month, unlimited transactions. But for that reason, if you're just kind of doing the math of say $400 per transaction, we make the most sense for agents who are consistently closing 2-3 transactions per month. That's why top producers, individual agents get really excited by us, is they're like, better quality, flat price, game over, let's work together. And brokerages say, hey, this is super interesting and it makes sense for my top producers, but it doesn't make sense for somebody who just signed up in the real estate space a couple months ago and is still getting their feet wet.
Right. Okay, awesome. And then the next question I have for you guys is, how have you seen the industry changing since COVID has happened? And Christian, you want to take this one?
Yeah, this is kind of really interesting. It's tough to kind of break out whether changes would have happened anyway, right? Because it seemed like technology was moving more towards, I mean, online only for the last 20 years since I was first an agent, where I had to drive around and pick up keys, right? And get my Maps Go book and a pen and paper I mean, literally, when I was in Dallas, I actually knew every single street. I didn't use the maps. Go after about 5-10 years, I could just drive you to any house like a cab driver in London. But things have been moving where it's been getting easier and easier, almost, I would say, to be an agent. You can plug an address into your phone. You can set up showing time. It's going to take you to the houses and work out the most efficient route, right? That people are not having to go and view homes necessarily in person. Matterport, trends like that have been happening for years already. I think what we've seen is an acceleration in the adoption of services that may have been sitting out there already, that were kind of waiting in the wings, and you had these early adopter agents who were using them, right? Door locks, where people could go tour themselves, the full VR, like immersive tours, things like that. I think what's happened is it's just sped that up, because people were more willing to remove the person-to-person contact, right? So technology that kind of fills that space has become kind of, more prevalent and more widely known. We've actually just did a survey recently that had some really interesting results around how many people were willing to buy homes sight unseen. And it was actually, I'll have to share the survey results with you guys because I don't have them to hand. We haven't finished the piece yet, but we had some really funny questions we asked too, like, would you be willing to bribe somebody to secure the home? Things like this. But what we found from our surveys and what I've seen in the market is people are more willing to rely on technology nowadays because of COVID. But I think that would have happened anyway. I think that's the way we were going. We're seeing Gen X is probably the largest home buyer segment, and younger at the moment, people that are more familiar with technology. So I think what the impact has had is really just to accelerate the process of where we were moving as an industry, and tools, luckily, like us, like we are a remote tool, essentially. So we've seen a huge amount of growth during this period, because in our situation, you could either traditionally, if you needed to get repair estimates after inspection, you could go and meet a group of contractors at the house. And you wouldn't know these people. You wouldn't know if they follow safety protocols, if they've been vaccinated, if they're going to be cautious about, exactly what's going on. Or you can simply click a button and get the answers you need. So I think it's kind of forced people to adopt some tools, in some cases that maybe wouldn't have grown as quickly as they were before.
Okay. Shawn, I know it's a little bit difficult to go second, but do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think that's exactly, I think Christian hit the nail on the head. I think the largest difference here is buyers, when they used to go out to go out with agents to look at homes, used to be deciding, do I want to make an offer? And if so, which house? Now, when people are going out on tours, it's confirming whether or not they want to make an offer. The decision has already been made because all of the tools have essentially given them the information they need to have made. And honestly, that's why we've seen the bidding wars that we did see over this past summer. I mean, we have a very large data set based off of all of the transactions we're running. And there was a point this summer, which we've never seen before, where 100% of the transactions in our systems that were active at that moment were under contract above list price. And the reason why is because you can have 100 buyers at home essentially make the decision already that they want to put an offer in and confirm it when they're going to see the house, which is infinitely larger audience than, say, the 10 people who actually went through the house and walked it a decade ago. So I think it's exactly right. And it's that switch between deciding versus confirming that's really driving what we're seeing here in the market.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Localized. They're based just in New York specifically, but they just got, I think, a 20 or 25 mil round as well. They are focused entirely on making sure that you only go to see the exact house or condo or townhome that you want. Like they use very sophisticated AI, which honestly, I think that used to kind of be the job of a good agent, right? Yeah. You were market focused. Like when I was in Dallas, I did Uptown, M Street, Slow Green, but like that was my little kind of area. If a house came on the market, I knew it, I was in it, I toured it already, so that if my clients came by, for me, it was purely selfish, right? I could tour it once and I could tell that client, you're not going to like it. Don't worry about it. Let's cut it off our list because it makes you more efficient. But all of these tools are essentially just making the agents more efficient. That, yeah, Shawn's right. You're showing somebody 2 or 3 homes, not 20 or 30, because they've already been able to go in and do 3D tours and things like that and really whittle it down and say, yeah, it's a tight market. I've got to make that decision. I just want to go and confirm this is the right house. And here in Austin, where Newchip's based and we're based as well, we literally had lines of people lining up to go in a house. And you don't do that if you're just browsing, unless you're a little strange. You know, it was, people were lined up around the block to wait to get in a house to say, yep, this is the one that I want. This is it. I'm going to try and lock it in. And then, as Shawn said, to go into those multiple offer situations that I've never seen a market like this before ever. And it was crazy to me because you think during COVID, you want to move. And it was in the middle of that this was happening. And people were still willing to kind of make these almost split-second decisions.
Yeah,
it's a great point, because a topic that I've seen a lot over the past, call it 3 to 6 months raised, is the idea of, is an agent even still needed? Do people still need agents today? And you're exactly right. Like, the AI is kind of taking the place of in some capacity, of what a good agent would provide. It's already telling you if you're going to like the house or not. And I think that's kind of where people are going. I'd be curious for your thoughts on this, but at least us personally at Close Concierge, we very strongly disagree with that concept of the agent is going to be replaced entirely by technology. I could very easily see that scenario for an investor. I could see that scenario for somebody who's been through the home buying purchasing process many times. But if we're talking about a first-time home buyer who's going to be putting their life savings down on a property, I have a very hard time of believing you're going to see a world where they don't have some sort of agent, some sort of stand-in who's helping them throughout that entire process, because there are a lot of questions that come up, especially as a first-time home buyer. I don't know if I personally would be willing to put all my savings into something without that person, that advisor through that process.
Yeah, no, I agree. As somebody who's trained agents, however, I think there are a lot of agents out there that maybe should not be working. And what I would like to see is the clients that you have, that are top producing, they know their markets, they've sold a lot of homes, they've got a lot of experience, they've spent time with the clients, giving them access to the tools that they need to just be more efficient, so that they have the time to still spend with the clients. I think that's what we're going to see happen, is you're going to have less agents, but they're going to be performing at essentially a higher rate. They're going to be more efficient. They are more business-like. It's like here in Austin, I think we went from 7,500 to 13,000 agents in about 4 years, right? 4 years, maybe you can get enough experience to be like a top-level agent. But yeah, I definitely think we're going to see this trend to less agents, but more experience, like higher producing, more efficient people. I don't see a situation, you're right, where someone just blindly writes a check for $500,000 for their first home without any kind of human interaction or questions, right? Even sitting there and having the world's best chat bot. Or as I saw landing at the airport yesterday in Houston, a hologram greeting me. You know, I can't imagine an open house with a hologram, maybe something like that. But it's not a stand-in, it's not a replacement for the amount of knowledge that you soak up when you've been in a market and you've been in every building and every townhome complex, and you know what they're building down the street, and if the wind changes direction on the wrong day, the refuse collection day, you know, like the kind of stuff that I don't know how exactly you would try and focus on that amount of experience and knowledge with AI, because yeah, the human brain is a simply amazing thing, and there's some amazing agents out there because of that.
And Christian, one thing that I wondered was, like, we talked about how houses are getting sold right now without people actually seeing them in person. And I know some people I've heard are basically saying, I don't even need to have the house appraised. I don't need to see the damages that have been done. It's been something that you've noticed. Has that been an issue?
Yeah, so I think there's a important distinction to make there, is what's happening. Is in some markets, people are waiving their home inspection contingency, right? And this basically is part of the contract that says the findings of the inspection report have a bearing on whether or not the contract comes through. what people are not willing to do, and the survey we did recently will highlight this too, and we've had some recent press about this. People are still getting the homes inspected. They're just saying it may not be dependent, or the contract may not be dependent on this. People still need to find out what's going on with the home. If there are issues, most sellers aren't up climbing on the roof every day. They genuinely normally don't know if something's wrong, or they've kind of lived with it long enough that it's not a big enough problem for them. But yeah, what we're advising people to do, and advising our home inspection partners too, and in doing forums like this as well, is saying, look, even if you waive your home inspection contingency during a transaction, you should still get your home inspected, whether it's before you move in, after you move in, 4 weeks after you move in. A home is a very kind of complicated living thing, and you need to know what's going on with it, and you've got to protect the value in it as well. Especially nowadays, as younger buyers maybe don't have as much experience in doing DIY and home maintenance. That's kind of one of the reasons why we're here too, is to let people know, that's not a big issue. It's $80 to fix it. Don't worry about it. Or yeah, this is a big ticket item. You should be worried about it. But yeah, and then the appraisal issue is something that's different as well. Right now, we're seeing a lot of shortages in home appraisals, essentially in certain areas here in Austin. Really bad. Some of it's due to the regulations that we had, the Dodd-Frank Act that came through. Some of it's just due to people aren't necessarily excited about being home appraisers anymore. But I see that's part of the industry too, that is kind of ripe for innovation. That I've not seen a lot of exciting things in that space yet.
Gotcha.
I 100% agree with all of that. Again, across our data set of all of our transactions, it is a very, very small percent of transactions that don't have an inspection attached to them. And the majority of those are ones where it's a developer buying the house and they're going to knock it down anyways to put something up new. So in that case, inspection is moot. The appraisal waiver is absolutely something that we're seeing in a higher percentage than ever before. I'll have to check the numbers, but I think it's roughly 30% or so of our transactions this summer had an appraisal waiver attached, which is absolutely bonkers. And if we're talking about delayed closings, where all of the work hasn't been done ahead of time to get to the closing table, we have to push it out a week, 2 weeks, something like that. The vast majority of those cases this summer were because there wasn't an appraisal in time. And the problem that we were running into with that, and to Christian's point, is I think it's roughly 3,000 hours is the number of hours an appraiser needs to have practice before they can get their license and be running their own appraisals themselves, which is an absolute ton. It takes forever to get that license. And this is different in different locations, but some of the locations in which we work, appraisers have their ability to essentially set their own territory. So they say, I'm going to appraise homes in this 2-mile radius, and that's that, which means if you have a home slightly outside that radius, the appraiser is not going to go there. They don't want to. They have more than enough work that they don't need to. So in that situation, you need to scramble to find an appraiser, or the bank needs to scramble to find an appraiser, because they don't want to go there.
Yeah, on my recent refis, not even sales, on refis, I had to call the appraiser myself and basically kind of on bended knee beg and say, can you get this? Because I've locked my rate and my rate's about to expire because you haven't gotten out there yet. And what can I do to make it easy for you? I just had a piece come out today in MSN and Real Home as well about this specific issue, that this lady from San Antonio, they quoted in the piece too. She said, you would not believe, she's an appraiser, you would not believe how many appraisal requests she's getting on a daily basis. She just can't fulfill them. She get 20, 30 appraisal requests a day. I mean, a good appraiser can do 3 in a day, something like that. And so what we're seeing now, unfortunately, is these kind of almost bidding wars. Someone will say, well, if you can come out, I'll give you $1,000. Because they're going to save a lot more than that if they don't have to relock their loan again. So now it's nuts what's going on out there at the moment. Yeah, the appraisal waivers, though, that is scary. If you've got the money, I guess it's not. Right? If the buyer has the money to bring to the table and they're willing to say, you know what, here's an extra 50, 100K down, which they're having to do in a lot of markets. Again, Austin here in Point, everything's going over list price. You'll see a $500,000 home go for $700,000. So Yeah, appraisals, I guess it's more part of the mortgage process. If you don't get an appraisal and you're willing to commit the money, that's fine. The home inspection, though, that's more like a long-term tool you can use to gauge the health of the home. But people do get those two things mixed up, the public, I think, too.
Yeah, I 100%. And just for anybody who's ever watching this, is we do a lot of transactions. We know the process very well. Like, the client should never need to call the appraiser. And the fact you had to do that, it speaks volumes about the whole setup going on right now, because that should never, ever, ever need to happen.
Yeah. I think it may have been that the mortgage, lender knew me and knew I was a broker or used to be a broker, and was like, "Can you just lean on him a little bit?"
Got it.
But yeah, they were like, "We can't get a hold of him. Like, he won't answer his phone." So I was just sending him cute little text messages every now and again. Are you free? Can I buy you lunch? Can we be friends? Come, please come and appraise my home so I don't lose my rate lock. But I mean, I'm joking, guys, but it's insane. The survey we did, Austin again was most telling. And this was Billy, an online survey of agents on Facebook on some of the groups that I belong to. But I think, what Shawn's saying, not only those people that are waiving the appraisals, but 30 to 40% of agents had lost deals because appraisals were not happening in time. And the sellers maybe thought it was the buyers dragging their feet. And they think, oh, well, you know what? In the time that we've been waiting for this appraisal to come in, my house has probably gone up 20K. So I'll just throw it back on the market. Whereas, like, then you've got to go get another appraisal. So it becomes this kind of vicious cycle. You never actually sell your home. But
it's a vicious cycle. But the crazy thing about this is we'll call it the vast majority of situations, the appraisal comes in at the exact price of the purchase contract anyways. So it's this process that's delaying things, but it's not delaying things for a situation that is frequently going to change the actual outcome of the transaction.
Yeah. I mean, it was meant to create a more efficient process and a more transparent process. That was the whole idea behind the regulation that was done. And I think it was done with the right intention in mind. But it's not done that. It's created an almost mini kind of market monopoly in areas where an appraiser is left to pick and choose their jobs. Like Shawn's saying that you're half a block outside of my service area, I'm not going to drive there. It needs fixing. It's a part of the industry. Like I said, I'm a little busy doing home inspections. But if I wasn't in this, I'd be looking at that space right now too. But we are seeing a rise in hybrid appraisals and some waivers on FHA products below 400K that they've said you don't necessarily need an appraisal. But nothing really from the technology standpoint I see that's kind of supporting the appraisers. We talk about making the agent more efficient. How to make the appraisers more efficient, right? I think there are some hybrid approaches right now where they're actually even using agents to go into homes and doing the walkarounds, and then the appraiser remotely is doing like a desk appraisal on the home. But it's not very common at the moment. Yeah.
We should do another conversation in 6 to 12 months, and we'll have the CEO of an appraisal tech company here with us.
Yeah, exactly. I have a different T-shirt on. So
perfect. I'll swap out a different jacket. We'll be good.
Yeah.
Nice. So Christian, you're in Austin, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Shawn, Christian, and I have seen lots of Californians and New Yorkers moving here. A lot of money pouring in and inflating the market. Is that the same? You're in Chicago, right, Shawn?
We're in Chicago, although our two largest markets are actually Texas and Florida. The 3 states with the most agents are California, which you actually need a specific TC license to work there, so we don't. Texas and Florida. So.
Gotcha. Okay. I was just curious, are you seeing the same influx of people to the Chicago area that we're seeing here in Texas?
It's interesting. We have seen some influx to the Chicago area. I don't think nearly to the extent that we've seen in some of the other cities. Chicago is phenomenal. I'm a big Chicago fan, but there are some pretty significant structural issues to Chicago that I think has been hurting our influx, and agents that we know quite well and work with here have told us that very common questions they hear from people trying to move here from the coast, or honestly the state of Illinois' pension program and how bankrupt it is and the expected tax increase that's going to come as a result.
Very interesting. And then I want to talk a little bit about, you guys both mentioned how you think agents are here to stay. Something that I find interesting is that agents usually make around 5 or 6% commission on the sale price of the house. And I know Redfin is doing, I think, 1%. Is that right?
I think a lot of these,
Depends.
they're going to show a difference between the kind of perception of what's the actual total listing commission percentage and then what they charge on the listing side, because you're going to normally split that listing percentage between two agents. So yeah, I think a lot of these companies, when they advertise, it's a 1% or 1.5% listing fee, that may just be on the listing side, and then they kind of leave it up to you. Well, would you still like to pay a buyer's agent commission? Because I think, I mean, I'd be interested to see the stats on this, but buyer's agents are still very much driving transactions in the markets. You know, so I think some of these kind of things can be a little bit misleading about what the actual cost to the consumer is. And I've seen this with some of the iBuyer programs.
Yep.
When you add up the fees that these companies that are offering all cash for homes actually end up charging the consumer, it's substantially more than what the typical listing agent would charge.
That's absolutely right. And I can confirm, having done transactions on the other side of Redfin and similar, the total commission that the seller is paying is a lot more than 1%.
Okay, gotcha. I'm glad I asked, because that confirms kind of what I was thinking. Okay. All right.
I mean, there are flat fee brokerages that will charge sometimes just to put something in the MLS and charge a small amount for that. But yeah, the amount of support you typically get is not comparable. And I've even heard stories of people filling out their own contracts.
Recipe for disaster. Speaking from the TC side, that is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I've seen a contract filled out by a new agent who's licensed, right? And those have been pretty bad sometimes. So I can't imagine one filled out by somebody who has no grounding in real estate knowledge whatsoever, and they're just kind of doing a fill in the blank. Yeah, not the best idea for the consumer.
Honestly, it's part of the reason why our business model is to work with those top producing agents. It's a lot easier. They've been through hundreds of transactions. They know what they're doing. There's no situation where we need to go back and be like, listen, like, you completely forgot to put in this, like, a very key element to the contract that needs to go in there.
Like the address.
The address, I've seen
Price.
some stuff. Price is a big one.
Yeah.
Texas is interesting because Texas has no standard 1-to-4 contract. It has the amount that's being paid on the down payment, the amount that's being financed, and then the total purchase price. And it's very common to see agents forget one of those two, especially whether the financed amount or the down payment amount when they're new agents. Then you have to cross-reference it against what's called the third-party financing addendum, which tells you how much the loan is. And it's very common for that amount to not match the amount that's on the actual contract for the financed amount.
It's because Zip Forms doesn't carry it over for you.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I've seen that. Yeah, when I was young, sprightly agent typing away. And yeah, you have to do maths all of a sudden as well.
You do, and Trek just updated yesterday, actually, the 1-to-4 contract. It's 20-16 now. But Zip Forms has not made that change. So we've had 5 or 6 new contracts get intaken this morning that are still on the 20-15. So it's kind of an interesting thing where Zip Forms is great, but there's some issues to it that lead to issues in transactions.
Yeah, and those are experienced agents. So yeah, consumers out there doing this by themselves, like I said, it's one of the reasons I don't see the good agents going anywhere.
But to that point, I think you can absolutely expect to say, we touched on this slightly earlier, consolidation amongst the absolute top agents. And I'd also expect those agents to go brokerage hopping because, and we saw this with Compass, like, I'm gonna cut my split as a brokerage, so you come over here. And then 6 months later, I don't know, at Properties, for example, big in Chicago, just went to Dallas, gives you a slightly better split, you're gonna jump back over there.
Yeah, and Compass were paying bonuses, right, to move. Yeah,
that's right. And some marketing to spend too for some agents.
Yeah, it's very, very different to how it was even 10 years ago, I think.
All right. And then another question I have for you guys is, so many different entities profit off of the purchase and sale of a house, from the real appraiser to the title company. Do you guys see this consolidating one day, or do you think it's going to continue to be kind of compartmentalized that way?
So I can jump in on this. So I mentioned before doing Close Concierge, I worked in consulting. So I worked for Boston Consulting Group, and then I had my own consulting firm. I did a lot of work for private equity firms. There is significant interest in the private equity space about consolidating, rolling up title companies. If you ever looked at a closing disclosure, you can see like title companies, it's an absolute racket in terms of how much they're able to charge. You see things like $80 printing fees and $250 wire receipt fees and things like that. There's a lot of interest because of their financial position and consolidating, rolling them up. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see this pretty aggressively over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think the major challenge maybe would be creating similar models across the US, because there is so much different regulation in each state regarding every single space. Yeah, it's doable, but obviously a challenge for somebody. But yeah, it's funny. We try and educate consumers about this, is they don't question those fees on the closing statement, right? The printing fee, a legal fee, the title insurance cost. And what's funny to me is that the home inspection fee is the one thing that sits outside of that closing statement that you kind of pay up front. Everything else, they're like, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's a printing fee, right? It's the one thing that sits outside of this. So I'd be interested to see if that's something that changes in the industry, that it's not mandatory. That's the only kind of issue. It's not a mandatory part of the process, but as part of consolidation, would that be something that in the future you would just see every single thing on one closing statement at the end, and that's it? Yeah.
That certainly
would be interesting.
Sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Doesn't mean it's going to happen in the real estate industry, though. That's key takeaway, I think.
Key takeaway. And honestly, you hit on the most important point there, which is every state is wildly different in terms of how things are done. Like, at least for us, we actively turn down work in, we'll call it low population states. For example, Delaware recently, actually this week, because the state-by-state process is so unique. It doesn't make sense for us to move into low population states where we're just not going to have a lot of agents to work with, because the process is so unique. The technical lift on our side to build up the tech to support each state's different process is not worth it, because every state's different, and there's just unfortunately more states that have, there's states that have higher populations that make more sense for us to work in.
Yeah. When we will support anybody in a state, but we do not target those states for expansion that basically have the low population, low turnover, no urban density. Like, again, like you, Shawn, I mean, Texas, we're based here, but it's our biggest state. California, Florida, Georgia, Colorado, like those are our big markets. And that's really just been organic versus kind of intentionally. But yeah, you've got big realtor populations as well. And I think a lot of transient people too.
Absolutely.
So you guys talked a little bit about how the appraisal space is ready for some disruption. Are there any other aspects of the real estate industry that you think could be shaken up?
I mean, I think home search still could be better for the consumer. I mean, it is getting better, and like we said, people are kind of able to whittle down to homes online more, so they're going out and they're not doing like a shopping expedition, they're doing a confirmation. But when you look at the amount of time people spend on Zillow and sites like this, and there was that amazing parody that I think SNL did with people Zillow shopping, and I'm not going to talk about the concept, but go look it up, it's hilarious. But people do spend that much time browsing homes, and I can't tell if it is voyeuristic or it's because they're really taking that much time to find the right one. I think that, and I kind of touched on it earlier with the company Localized out of New York. They're doing interesting stuff in that space. But I think, yeah, like Trevor, appraisal, it's just, it's a big problem at the moment. It's a big problem. It's causing issues. Yeah, and how do we get people to the right house faster? That's something that I think still could be worked on more.
Those are all great examples. I'll throw in one on the after the contract has been signed in the transaction coordination world. We come across a lot, and I think we're going to come across way more. And that is the mortgage lending process for self-employed individuals. It is extremely difficult to get a loan. Exactly. It's
for 20 years.
Yes, it is substantially easier to get a loan making $50,000 a year as a W-2 employee than it is making $500,000 a year as a self-employed individual. It is absolutely ridiculous. And if you think about the world we're moving into, where more and more people are freelancing and they're making their own income, it's going to be extremely hard for those people to buy a home. We recently did a transaction where we had an individual who we were on the buy side. We were working with this individual and their agent. The individual made more money last year than the entire amount of their mortgage. It should have been a slam dunk, easy approval. And it was literally the day before closing, and they're still fighting with the lender, threatening lawsuits back and forth against each other because the lender is terrified this person's not going to be able to pay the loan that, again, was less than the money they actually made last year. It's a very, very, very archaic setup where it's favored W-2 employees. And as we get more and more and more into this freelance economy, it's got to update, or it's not going to end up working, or you're going to have a lot of people who can't buy a house.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really seen like a flagship product for a company that is for self-employed individuals. You have them for doctors, right? And things like you have these products, but yeah, you've got like in credit card world, you've got Brex, right? For startup founders and that kind of thing. You've got very specific targets. It's a really good point that, yeah, I've not seen somebody, and trust me, there's probably enough data on me over the last 20 years to be like, you're self-employed, you own property, here's a product for you. Nobody's done that. The other bit, I should have touched on it earlier when we discussed COVID, is Shawn, remote closings.
Yeah.
Is that standard now? Because when I was working, it was either someone had to drive to your house and do a notary, but are we seeing a rise in like online closings? Is that, I saw some states that allowed that. Yeah,
so it's entirely state dependent right now. There's some people who got kind of into it some title companies and attorneys who got kind of into it, then they kind of took advantage of COVID doing it because they could do a lot more in an individual day. It was a lot easier, right? Because you're doing it online. However,
they lose the printing fee. So that's a big revenue stream right there.
That's true. That printing fee is gone there.
Remote closing fee.
Remote closing fee. There you go. We saw a ton of mailaways too, where you would have somewhere a buyer in California who's buying something in Dallas. They can't get there right now because of COVID. They bought the house online, haven't seen it in person, and they're sending a mobile notary to go close that. We've seen that a lot. I'm not convinced it's going to be here to stay, simply because I've seen a lot of title companies and a lot of attorneys go back to, hey, we really want you to be in office for closing.
Do you know why? Or
I think it's a comfort thing. I think it's a familiarity thing. It's a lot easier for them to just get the people in and send them out. I've also had issues with mobile notaries. Unless you send them documents that have literal flags on it, like sign here, sign here, sign here, where the mobile notary doesn't know what they're doing. They make a mistake, the wrong thing signed, something that needs to be signed isn't signed, and then you have a delayed closing because you need to send somebody back out there to go get an Alta statement signed that should have been signed in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think it's if it's done, it's got to be electronic signature.
Yeah.
And is that binding in that state? Because I know some documents require actual ink. Like some IRS documents, I think too, do require. You've got to actually physically sign. I think maybe that's the issue that's got to change first. But yeah, I do see eventually where you just buy it online. I mean, I bought a car online before.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, the wet signature thing doesn't at least in Texas, zip forms, .loop, DocuSign, HelloSign, everything is signed electronically, but sometimes you need wet ink on the actual close,
which is, it's
doesn't
almost
make
like
sense.
less secure to me. I mean, I can log somebody's IP address, their location, capture a picture. I mean, yeah.
All right, guys. Well, that's all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll have your socials, social, tags and everything shared. And thanks again for joining.
Awesome.
Thanks for
Many,
having
many
us.
thanks, Trevor.